The Dark Crystal Minute is brought to you by Dream Fasting, the Dark Crystal Experience, a Facebook group on the Dark Crystal by fans for fans. To join the group, search on Facebook for Dream Fasting, the Dark Crystal Experience.
Another world, another time, in the age of wonder.
You are listening to the Dark Crystal Minute.
And begin all the same. Sometimes good, sometimes bad.
And now once more the world must undergo a time of testing.
It is time to return to the castle.
There is much to be learned, and you have no time.
And here's your hosts, Philip Mitchell and JM Prater. Hello everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Dark Crystal Minute. I'm Philip Mitchell from Trial by Stone, the Dark Crystal podcast.
And I am JM Prater, the founder and co-host of Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast.
And this is the very first episode of this new podcast that I thought that it would be sort of a great addition as part of the Dark Crystal podcast network of sorts of shows that are happening right now. So, which is very exciting stuff. And for one of the shows, I sort of pitched to Jamie about doing this sort of a minute-by-minute discussion on the film, The Dark Crystal. And so, we all agreed, and here we are sort of chatting for the podcast, so which is very exciting. I guess for any of the new listeners out there, well, there's a lot of sort of the movies by minute podcasts out there, and Star Wars Minute was the first one that sort of started the trend. And since then, there's been a lot of movies from Pirates of the Caribbean, and I guess, Jamie, even an Alien minute podcast as well. So, which is great, and it was just something that I thought that something like the Dark Crystal would be an excellent addition as part of the sort of the movies by minute sort of podcast genre. And I think as well that there's a lot to probably talk about within each minute of the Dark Crystal. And also, before we start getting deep into the first minute, we'll introduce ourselves. So my name's Philip Mitchell, and I host a Dark Crystal podcast called Trial by Stone, the Dark Crystal podcast that I started since August 2014. And every month we interviewed people who worked on the films, or fans, and anyone about the world of the Dark Crystal. So that's my background with all things Dark Crystal, and how I got into it was through, I think, watching it as a kid through the VHS tapes and watching it multiple times. So that's sort of how I grew up with the Dark Crystal. Jamie, I just thought I might as well ask, just kind of briefly, how did you grow up with the Dark Crystal?
Very similar. Someone had a VHS copy when I was a kid, and this was in the mid to late 80s. It was even a Betamax copy. And I saw this film, and, I think we see a lot of movies that kind of, like Star Wars, which you and I are, of course, big fans of. The Dark Crystal did something different to me than Star Wars, and I think it did the same thing with you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Blew my mind, and like you, I just watched it over and over and over and over and over. I couldn't get enough of it. I watched it 28 times in a week at one point, and I think I've told you that before. So yeah, that's and I've been a huge fan ever since.
And I guess for any of the listeners that want to know more about how we both got into the Dark Crystal, you can listen to episode 1 of Trial by Stone, the Dark Crystal podcast, as well as episode 6, which was my first interview with Jamie to chat about his passion for the Dark Crystal. And because through the podcast, we kind of met up, through online and through Skype, and had conversations. And we actually got to meet up at Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim back in April 2015.
Yep, it was awesome.
Yeah, it was a fantastic time, yeah. Yeah, so we've known each other ever since then, and it's just been fantastic.
It has been. It's been a great. I mean, and obviously, Philip and I, we were trying to get a documentary produced, and it didn't really happen, but I think from that, we formed a deeper friendship and connection and bigger fandom, and so yeah, it's been fun. Certainly as the next couple of years go by, it's going to be a fun time.
Yeah, it's certainly a fantastic time to be a Dark Crystal fan. Now we've got this new show, The Age of Resistance, that's going to come out soon on Netflix. So, and I guess because of the excitement of the show, that I thought, yeah, again, that I thought to do a Dark Crystal minute would interest a lot of people who are jumping on board for the first time, just started watching the film and want to know more about the world of the Dark Crystal. So, which is great. All right, so I guess we'll start off for the very first minute of the Dark Crystal. So each episode, again, we'll just cover a minute of the film. So the film goes for about an hour and 33 minutes to be precise, and 8 seconds. So there'll be certainly a lot of episodes from this Dark Crystal Minute podcast as we go through each minute. So for this one, the first minute sort of starts with black, fades to Universal, the globe, then to the credits, and then to a shot of the castle of the crystal with a voiceover sort of narrating the story. And it ends with the narrator saying, then strife began and 2 new races appeared, the cruel Skeksis, and that's where the minute ends. As I was looking through the notes for things to chat about this first minute, of course, you see the Universal Studios logo, which is I guess, this is a film that came out in 1982, so a very old-fashioned logo, of course. And, of course, I think I always think of the Universal Studios logo when watching lots of their films. I especially remember, I think, the Back to the Future Part 3 had a newer logo. This is in 1990, so it's always had a bit of an evolution. But, I kind of like this very old school look to it. And doing my research, I was always curious what an MCA company is. So I actually went on Wikipedia and just looked at it and realized that it stands for the Music Corporation of America. So I think it actually started out as a music-based company and sort of expanded to become, a big studio. And so I'm just trying to think. And I guess the thing is, in a weird way, it's going to be really interesting when we're going to see Age of Resistance, that we're going to see a Netflix logo at the start instead of the Universal, logo. So yeah, I just thought that was kind of interesting to sort of note that.
I love the mood. I love the mood of, you get the Universal logo, but it's dark. There's this darkness. You're right away. The audio and the visuals are taking you to a place you haven't been before, and the music and the narration is all setting it up in that first minute. So it's like this grab right away.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And so of course it fades to black. And then we get some text. Lord Grade presents for ITC Entertainment, a Jim Henson film. So Lord Grade, he's known as Lou Grade, but he was sort of one of the big producers who really helped Jim Henson during the time with The Muppet Show, which The Muppet Show was a show, I think, that came out in the 70s. And basically, I think from my memory, Jim Henson, I think he tried to pitch it to all over the US, essentially, for the show. No one was interested, except for him. I think he was very interested. And sort of because of that, they got to do The Muppet Show and actually shot in London as well. So yeah, England was pretty nice to to Jim Henson when it came to doing The Muppet Show, which eventually led to the Muppet movies, and of course the Dark Crystal, which has always been a passion project of Jim Henson. And I think every time he sort of approached Lou Grade, hey, I want to do this Dark Crystal film, and he's like, no, I want more Muppet films. So he sort of came around eventually.
Wasn't it a kind of thing too where he said, you let me do this and then I'll do that. You give me the Dark Crystal and then I'll give you something else.
Yeah, I think it was that he'll do the Muppet sequel, but in exchange, that he'll do the Dark Crystal, or he'll can make the Dark Crystal. So I mean, which is great. And then sort of it then goes to fades into a shot of the castle of the crystal, as it is well known these days. I mean, when you see it in the film, you just think of it as the castle, but it's been established as the castle of the crystal. And one curious thing when I was looking at the vision, I noticed how it goes from a Jim Henson film to a very purpley sort of color grade sort of style, but then it transitions it to being back to normal. So I'm really curious if that was just the way that the film was developed then when it came to making those kind of transitions. But yeah, there was just something that just when I'm watching it, in slow-mo, just that portion there. And so we see, the castle of the crystal. It is a very stormy night, which of course is going to lead to morning very, as we go into the next future minutes of the podcast. But yeah, just the detail of that first shot is really, it's really something there.
I almost think that whenever I see this opening shot, that it's like, it almost reminds me of Mordor a little bit, where this castle is, it's always dark. I didn't even get a sense that it was the weather. Obviously, later on in the film, as we'll eventually discuss, you get to the castle and it's daylight and it looks very different. But it just felt like this castle, this darkness that's in the land, is surrounding itself by this castle.
Yeah, you see the clouds moving. You see, a bit of lightning here and there, and you even see like sparks, from what I guess would have to be, the underground. That's sort of that's flowing around.
Maybe communications.
Yes, yeah. And just the detail of the sets, like even just seeing a little bit of dust, just floating past the screen. It just adds that realism to the world.
It makes me think of when Jen and Kira are in the castle later on in Fizzgig, and he's rolling around, and you see those little crawling things that they tried to eat off the table.
Yes, yeah.
Those little crawling ooze or whatever they call it.
They're called crawlies. Yeah, I was just actually just watching it just now to see what it. Yeah, it looks like just some dust bowl, like one of those Western films that you see. But it is kind of cool. Yeah. Just another. Yeah, let's just add this little bit of detail. And and so the narrator, who is Joseph O'Connor, he was born in Dublin in 1910 in Ireland, and he was well known for his work on Oliver, Elizabeth, and Anne of 1,000 Days. So more of those period films. And of course, the narrator of The Dark Crystal, which again, it's one of those things when we're going to see The Age of Resistance, who could possibly be the new voice or the new narrator.
Is he alive still?
No, unfortunately, he passed away in 2001. So he's no longer with us. So I mean, I would love to hear him come back, but no, unfortunately, no longer with us. I mean, he passed away. He was 90 years old. So.
Oh wow, yeah.
So no, he lived a long life. So I don't know, it was just something that just made me thought about with him. No longer being with us, who would be potentially be the new narrator. With the narrator, basically, we sort of get those words that sort of became the tagline of The Dark Crystal. Another world, another time in the Age of Wonder, which is sort of, I guess, like an equivalent of sort of a Once Upon a Time, or you could say a Star Wars a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Yes.
But it's sort of weird because it's like, is it really the Age of Wonder at that time? Like things are pretty dark here. Skeksis are ruling the world, and there's all Gelflings are pretty much wiped out as far as they're concerned.
Well, maybe they mean the Age of Wonder in terms of wondering what the next age will be. Will Thra survive? What will happen? Like kind of this big, the age of a question, which is a question we wonder. Like I'm wondering about. I have a question about. Like what does this the next great conjunction have for us? What does it have for this world? So maybe they mean wonder in that sense, because wonder can mean very many things.
Absolutely, yeah. I just thought I'd just have a little bit of fun with that little moment there. But yeah, I mean the whole world it is a wonder. So yeah, I mean the narrator, we sort of get this sort of bit of a backstory of what's happened in the world of Thra. which Thra is a name that we don't actually hear in the film, but in novelizations, and I think the world of the Dark Crystal, they refer to the planet as Thra, Thra, which is sort of almost like an acronym of Earth without the letter E. So yeah, he says 1,000 years ago, this land was green and good until the crystal cracked. For a single piece was lost, a shard of the crystal. Then strife began, and 2 new races appeared: the cruel Skeksis and
the
the gentle mystics. Yeah, which is the next in the next minute that narration continues. So yeah, we sort of get this backstory that yeah, it's been 1,000 years since the place was good, and then the crystal cracked, which was actually cracked by one of the Skeksis. I think for any of the listeners who are new to the show, I know there is a graphic book series that sort of actually delves into the backstory even more, called the Dark Crystal Creation Myths. So there's 3 volumes of those graphic novels, so which they're definitely worth a read, and they really give you a lot more of this backstory of what actually went down within the 1,000 years of history. So yeah, and I think that was the thing with the narration. I believe in the original cut of the film that I don't think there was going to be any narration at all. It just made me think how interesting it would be if we never got any narration. Would the film have worked, or would we? I don't know. Have you heard about that, Jamie? Or
That's interesting. I think it would have been a very different film. I feel like the narration in the beginning, I feel like it's like we're visually opening up a book. It's like not visually. Well, audibly, it's like once upon a time this happened, and that whenever we, those books that we read as kids where they say once upon a time, automatically it's an audio cue for us to kind of go into wonder. So I feel like the narration for the Dark Crystal is so necessary. It just really sets up this idea that we're being transported into another world and another time. Yeah, and I can't imagine the film without it. Even though the end they don't include it anymore. I mean, they don't. There's no narration in the end. That setup in the beginning is just mythical. It's just like it reminds me of a little bit of Tolkien. It's the stuff of legend. It's amazing. I can't imagine it without it.
yeah, neither can I. I think like it really. I think at the end of the day, I think we really needed that narration to sort of it really establish the world and just get people that are watching the film for the first time sort of be able to grasp of what's going down, essentially. I'm just trying to think what else about this minute. I did write that first shot, it has a very 80s vibe to it. Well, of course, because it came out in 1982. But yeah, I mean, again, I think I sort of noted about the matte paintings, the lightning sound. Like every time when I hear that lightning sound, I know that it's like just from a sound effects, 80s sound effect section, that sort of thing. And I believe our ILM actually did help out with the effects. So I think ILM were probably responsible. The stormy clouds and whatnot in the background, which I guess is sort of similar effects to what they did on Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, where they put liquid in a tank, and then they shot it. But that was something that I wanted to mention, just in terms of that first minute, and like you said, it has an 80s vibe to it. But really, it's what it also is. It's a picture in time of the effects of the 80s and how everything we're seeing is a practical effect, and maybe they're composited, but everything is practical. This entire thing. I mean, maybe there's a matte painting, but then there's the castle, which is real. But then there's the clouds, which are photographed in a tank somewhere. Then we have the foreground and the all that stuff all coming together beautifully. So it's really a testament to the effects of the time.
The 80s was just a very, I don't know, it was just a very special time for film. Yeah, really, in regards to just the use of practical effects was at large, and I think a lot of films just had the very suspension of disbelief. And that's certainly what yes. I feel when I watch The Dark Crystal. Even many years and years later, I still believe that world is out there somewhere. And I think that's probably going to be really interesting to see once we get. I know, of course, I'm going to keep talking about Age of Resistance, but for us fans, it's a very exciting prospect that we're finally going to see.
This is like the second coming of Christ.
Yeah, because that was sort of the Dark Crystals. The news about the show was basically the equivalent of getting new Star Wars films back when they announced it in 2012. So,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
it's like getting 2 trilogies of Star Wars films in one foul swoop.
Yeah, I know. It's just a fantastic time to be a Dark Crystal fan. And I'm just trying to think. Is there anything else you wanted to add in for the first minute of the Dark Crystal Minute?
Well, I just I think just maybe to reiterate what I said. Really, that first minute, it draws you in. It really, it's like, okay, you're about to see something you've never seen before, and the Dark Crystal delivers on that promise, and it has continued to deliver on that promise. You watch that film and there is nothing else like it. Even Labyrinth, which was the next film that Jim Henson did, is nothing like the Dark Crystal. There's a similar concept design, and you can tell that's the same filmmakers, but it's nothing. It's more Muppety, far more Muppety.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, yeah.
And the Dark Crystal, really, it stands the test of time. There is no film that's even close to it. No one's even attempted anything like it since. So yeah, and I really feel like that first minute opening just is telling you that you're in for something that you've never seen before.
I really love the shot of the castle of the crystal, which again, I mean, in the next minute we'll get a much detailed or closer shot of the castle of the crystal. So that's something I'm looking forward to in the next minute of the Dark Crystal Minute. So yeah, I think let's wrap it up, and I just want to say to all the listeners, thank you so much to listening to the Dark Crystal Minute, and stay tuned for more episodes of the Dark Crystal Minute as we get into the second minute of the Dark Crystal. If you want to get in contact with us, you can do so at darkcrystalminute@gmail.com. You can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/darkcrystalminute. Or follow us on Twitter at DarkCrystalMin. This show is a part of the Trial by Stoner Dark Crystal podcast network. So if you can give a chance to give us a 5-star review on iTunes, gladly appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the show and come back next time for more Dark Crystal Minute.